In Newport News, Virginia, a kid grew up playing every sport he could find: baseball, basketball, football, a natural in all of them. By ninth grade, he gave everything else up. He chose football. He went on to become the most electric athlete the sport had ever seen. That athlete was Michael Vick. And he chose football, and football was never the same again. But what if he hadn't made that choice so early? What if Vick had stayed in the games he was built for, not one sport, but two? What if the answer was that you don't contain him, you evolve? What if the most unstoppable athlete in football history never had to choose just one sport? Not because he couldn't commit, not because of injury, but because in another version of his story, two different sports looked at the same impossible athlete, and both of them said yes at the same time. This is not a story about Michael Vick becoming the greatest basketball player of all time, or the greatest baseball player. This is a story about what happens when an athlete is too creative for any single system, and which sport is brave enough to stop trying to change him, and what that decision means for the sport that wins him. Let's AltPlay this. Michael Vick choosing only football was not inevitable. It was a deliberate decision made early. At Virginia Tech, he went 22-2 as a starter, led the Hokies to an undefeated season, named a first-team All-American in just 2 seasons. The Atlanta Falcons made him the first overall pick in 2001. At the Combine, he ran the 40-yard dash in 4.33, the fastest time ever recorded by a quarterback. Michael Jordan ran a 4.38. Vick's was a dead start sprint. Times that would have turned heads in any sport, anywhere. But here's what the Combine can't measure. Vick read the defense, created situations that had never been diagrammed, and made something out of nothing. Every coordinator hit the same wall. You could account for what he was supposed to do. What you couldn't account for was what he invented in real time. That gap between the scheme and the improvisation is where Vick lived. Now imagine those same instincts, fully unleashed, in 2 completely different arenas. In our alternate reality, football doesn't absorb him in the 9th grade. By his late teens, 2 sports are circling. Basketball offers freedom, transition chaos, the open floor as a playground, a sport that rewards creativity in real time and celebrates improvisation. Where the unpredictable player isn't a problem to solve, he's the whole point. Baseball offers something different. Quiet between plays, then absolutely explosive. A sport where one athlete on base can unravel an entire fielding structure before a single pitch is thrown. Where fear travels faster than the ball. The question was never whether he'd thrive. The question was which stage was big enough to hold what he'd become. Which sport deserves Michael Vick more? Basketball first. On the surface, the obvious fit. Vick's first step is violent. The kind of acceleration NBA guards train their entire careers to develop. In transition, he's not a basketball player improvising. He's a football player who has never been touched, running past a defense that has no scheme for him. The early 2000s NBA was already searching for exactly this. Allen Iverson had shown what happened when an impossible-to-contain guard was let loose, and the league was simultaneously fascinated and unsettled. Vick goes further, taller, longer, faster. A hybrid before the NBA had a language for it. But here's the problem every system eventually hits. Half-court basketball demands structure, shot discipline. And Vick's gift, pure improvisational instinct, is not the same as basketball IQ. The creativity is real. The half-court engine in the early years is not. He figures it out eventually. But in sports, time is the one thing you can't buy back. Now, baseball. And this is where it gets interesting. Baseball doesn't ask Vick to run an offense. It gives him the most valuable real estate in the sport, a base, and asks the other team to figure out what to do next. And they can't. He's a contact threat whose running game turns singles into doubles and doubles into throws fielders never should have attempted. In center, his range is immediate and absurd. A 4.3340 doesn't slow down when the surface changes. Baseball just needs him to exist inside a system. And his improvisation becomes a weapon the analytics era had spent years trying to eliminate. Teams built everything around predictability, launch angle, shift positions, all of it charted. And then Vick steps into the box, and none of those charts apply. Bunt down the third baseline, drag through the hole at first, beats out a grounder that's routine against anyone else, and then he's on base. And that's when the real problem starts. Watch what happens when you put these two paths side by side. In basketball, Vick's improvisation is the feature. Every fast break a showcase. But the half court eventually comes for every player, and there, improvisation without structure becomes a liability. The defense adjusts, the game slows, the magic has a ceiling. In baseball, the improvisation is the weapon. He doesn't need to run plays, he just needs to be unpredictable, and that he does naturally, in a way no analytics department can prepare for. Rickey Henderson called himself the greatest of all time without a trace of irony. It wasn't the stolen bases alone. It was the psychological pressure his presence created before a single pitch. Pitchers lost focus. Catchers rushed their signs. The game reorganized around one player's ability to make everyone else uncomfortable. Vick doesn't just recreate that, he amplifies it. He doesn't just threaten to run, he threatens to do something nobody has ever seen. And no system has ever successfully contained that threat. Basketball amplifies his flair. Baseball amplifies his danger. Here's where the ripple effects start to matter. In the basketball timeline, Vick arrives just as Steve Nash's Suns are about to change everything about how fast the game can be played. He doesn't create the pace era, he arrives just before it, and his style becomes part of the blueprint for what modern basketball allows itself to be. In the baseball timeline, the ripple cuts deeper. Baseball had been optimizing itself into a quieter game, stolen bases declining, speed treated as a liability. Vick exposes how brittle that model is the moment it meets something it never accounted for. Scouting departments start asking different questions. Youth coaches stop talking fast kids out of using their legs. The MLB marketing machine suddenly has an athlete who fills seats on a Tuesday night in April. In both timelines, younger athletes imitate the style. The refusal to be predictable. The willingness to make something out of nothing. Here's the real question this story leaves you with. Are generational athletes valuable because they dominate systems, or because they break them? The athletes who changed sports forever didn't do it by mastering what already existed. They did it by being something the system couldn't process. The sport had to adapt. The rules had to shift. The way coaches thought about the game had to expand to fit one player who wouldn't shrink. In football, Vick didn't just change the quarterback position. He changed what defenses had to be ready for. Not because of what he did, but because of what he might do at any given moment. In basketball, that same energy accelerates a revolution already forming. In baseball, it cuts against an era that had stripped the sport of its most watchable quality: genuine unpredictability. Which sport needed him more? Baseball. Because baseball had most completely forgotten what it felt like to be afraid of a single player on the field. Vick would have reminded it. Michael Vick in basketball or Michael Vick in baseball? Which sport would he have changed more? I think the answer changes depending on what you believe sports are actually for. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want more alternate reality sports breakdowns, the decisions that almost happened, the athletes who nearly changed everything, the ripple effects hiding inside a single choice, subscribe to AltPlay and hit the notification bell. We drop one of these every week, and the next one goes even deeper. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.